Hello and welcome. This is day 6 of Excel World Cup Bootcamp, or actually, I guess maybe day 7, because I did Bear Island yesterday, but never mind. Details. Today we're going to be talking about moving between cell addresses, rows and columns, and references. So let's just quickly explain what do I mean by that. Here is a cell address. A1 is the address of a cell up here. Column A, row 1. That can be named as A1. This is a reference to that cell. It says equals A1, and it picks up. You see, I've added a little high in here just so that there's some value for that to pick up. This is a row number, and this is a column number. It's a pretty common requirement in Excel World Cup cases that either you're given an input as an address and you need to go find what's there, turn it into a reference, or maybe you have an address, but you need to shift it by a certain number of rows and columns and then turn that back into an address so that you can give an answer in that format, that kind of thing. So it's not a lot of like firecrackers going off today, but I'm just going to walk you through the functions that you'll need to make those transitions. So first of all, from an address to a reference, just use the function indirect. And there's not much to say about this. Indirect, if you give it a string, it returns exactly what you would get if you took the inside of that string and put an equal sign in front of it. But the key thing obviously is that you can build that string up. So it doesn't have to be like A1 typed in here. It can be A and the contents of some cell that contains a 1, and various other kind of flavors of that. So it's very helpful that way. The one thing I will say is this format might not be immediately apparent, like open quote, single quote, D3X, close single quote, exclamation mark, da 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 da. If you're not used to the way that Excel references different sheet names, just make a non-indirect reference first. So in other words, I want to reference D3 examples, cell B5. So I'll come over here, go to cell B5. This is the string that I want. So now I just put that in double quotes, wrap that all in indirect, and then I can take it. Let's say that I want to, reference a variety of different cells there. Then I can say that and some cell that's going to contain B5, and then I can copy it down to other cells that contain other things. But just to get that syntax of, where do the single quotes go and where do the exclamation marks go and that kind of thing, you'll get used to it at some point if you do it a lot. I don't need to do that anymore, but that's the easiest way to not have to remember that. So the second thing, to go from an address to row and column numbers. Lots of different options here. One is to use indirect again with the row and column functions. So row of an address just gives you the row number of that address, or you can also use row without any argument and it'll give you the address of the cell that you're currently in. So again, you just use the first trick to turn this address into a cell reference by using indirect, and then take the row of that cell reference and the column of that cell reference. I think this is the easiest way to get, to turn this address reference into row and column numbers. But there's a couple of other ways, and depending on the circumstances, you might prefer them. So option number 2, use text split with multiple delimiters. So we talked about this during text week. If you want to get what comes before the first number, then you can say text before and just feed it in a sequence that goes 0 to 9. So 10 numbers starting from 0. Take the text before that, you're just going to get the text at the start. And then you can take text after of that by the text you got out here. Now to convert this AFD into a column reference, you're going to need to match it against a list, unless you use this trick up here. But in a lot of the cases where you're working with a map, in the esports cases, that list of column headers will be available, so that's not necessarily a big problem. But you will need to do that to get back to a number as opposed to just text. And then for simpler cases, you can just use fixed splits. This works best if the columns don't go past Z or Z, depending on your side of the Atlantic, which is often the case in the esports. Not always, but often. So here, for example, if you know that there's only ever one letter and 1 or 2 numbers, then you can just say mid 2 2. So in other words, starting from the second character and taking 2 characters. And if there aren't 2 characters, then mid will not throw an error. It'll just give you the one that's there. And then if there's only 1 letter at the start, then you can take the left of that and use code. Actually, I don't think you even need to take the left. I think code automatically, if you give it multiple characters, refers to the first character. That looked like it. Yeah, no, that worked. But just beware that if you have something like AB, well, this will break, and this will keep on saying 1 because it's just referring to the first letter. So these ones only work if you have a smaller grid. All right. So next thing, to go from row and column numbers to a reference, just use index. So you want the value that's in row 28, column 4, you just say index. In this case, I'm just indexing the whole sheet. In other cases, you would probably want to index a fixed range like a map. One thing to be aware of is the difference between the row number within a range and the row number absolutely. That's something that they've kind of played around with a bit in some of the cases. Let me just grab an example here. One of the more recent ones. So what you'll see is that in a lot of the more recent cases, uh, there's maps of various kinds in the esports cases. They don't typically start in A1 now. They typically start in B2 so that you can have a list of column headers above and a list of row headers down the side. But that just means you need to be a little bit careful. If they talk about row 2, do they mean the second row in the grid or do they mean row 2? Usually, if they've got the labels here, they're talking about row 2. So this label will match up to the actual row number, and that's why they do it that way. But just beware then that if you index within the range, and if you say give me the second row, that will be the second row of the range, which will be row 3. So you just need to be a little bit careful with that. All right, back to where we were. Next thing, row and column numbers to an address. You can use the address function. So if you, in other words, it's often when you're giving back an answer, you need to say something like, what cell do you end up in if you go up twice and left twice and right twice and yada, yada, yada. And so you can convert the starting point into rows and columns, and then you can do math to say, add 1 to here, subtract 2 from here, da, da, da. You'll end up with the final row and column numbers. You can convert that back into an address using the address function. If you use 4 as the fourth argument for the absolute number, meaning relative reference, then you won't get any dollar signs. If you just put in address of that row and that column, you'll get it with dollar signs, which is not the format you're going to want to give the answers in. So that's that. And then honorable mention in this set is offset. So offset lets you give it a reference to one cell, and then you tell it how many rows away from that you want to go up or down, how many columns away from that you want to go up or down, and optionally, if you don't just want to stay the size of the original reference, you can tell it how many rows tall you want the reference to be, how many rows wide you want the reference to be. Where this is helpful in an esports context is if you insert a row or a column, or if you make another copy of a map. So if you go to one of the earlier cases, this thing about starting the maps in B2, they only started doing that, I think, late last year. So if you're on one of the older cases, like Bear Island, for example, you might need to insert a row or a column. For example, if you're doing the kind of distance calculations where a cell has to refer to the cells around it, then that would throw an error if there's no cell above here or no cell to the left here. So you might find yourself inserting a row or a column, but now you want to say, well, the cell that was previously called, I don't know, L5 is now actually down here. So you can still reference that cell by an indirect and then use an offset to say go 1 down and 1 to the right from there. Or equally, if you make a bunch of copies of the map, like sometimes you need what are the values of the map, what are the addresses of the map, what are the bare locations of the map, what are other calculations about the map. Sometimes you'll want a cell to encode the color of the map, for example. If the easiest thing, if you want to reference a bunch of those, is just to make copies so that it's always in the same place. So you're just, for the indirect, just changing the location. But you can also kind of copy the whole thing, paste it, whatever, somewhere over here, and then just use an offset to shift over the right amount to get to that. So that's basically it for today. It's just kind of getting comfortable with navigating between those 3 different types: row, column number, cell reference, and cell address. So I'm just going to show you a few examples of where this comes up. And there are lots because it's been coming up for a long time. So here's one from the original FMWC Open, before it was even called the XL World Championships, where you had to navigate around a grid. And as you can see, the labels were on the right and on the bottom so that it would start in A1, which is what they've stopped doing more recently. Here's one from the finals of the original XL World Cup, which had a 100 by 100 chessboard. Some of the more recent ones, we had Lana Banana as one of the rounds. This one I think I did trip up on, actually. I looked at the grid, thought this looks small, and used left to identify the column number, and then got these column numbers wrong. It was this one or one of the others close to it. Anyway, and then of course Vluki the gold miner, where he had to move up and down and left and right and all around here, mining different things. And yeah, anyway, like I said, there are lots of examples. Oh yeah, table soccer was the other one, where again you had to like take an address as a starting point, convert that into row numbers and column numbers, and then you had to take a shot. So you could use your text functions to split this up, this 12 up to extract the number from that and the number from that, and then say, okay, from here I shoot 12 forward and 3 to the right, and so it ends up with this player, and then you had to get that player's address and so on. Anyway, that is enough examples, but the idea is basically you just need to have a certain degree of comfort and fluency in moving between these three different things, and these are all the functions that you need to do that. All right, it is now 15 minutes before this video is supposed to go live, because as ever I've left it to last minute production, so I'm gonna leave it at that and go upload this. Thanks for watching. See you next time.